All right, here we are. It's Donny and Matt from Standing For Truth Ministries, and we are going to be spending roughly 35 minutes on a few important issues, including a teaser into the failure of Dr. Dan Stern Cardinale. So he's put out a review, and we are just going to go over just a couple things. I'm working on an extensive, a comprehensive response to his review, and we will be putting it into a mini handbook that we will just sell at cost through Amazon, and then also make the PDF available for everybody, as well as a video series. So, Matt as well, we're both having a lot of fun with his responses, or I should say lack of responses. But before we get into that, I do want to announce the main reason why we are making this video is just to let everybody know that over a week ago, now we did 1 or 2 days where we were selling the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook for cost. So it was about $5. And the reason why we did that was because this is the perfect book for anybody who is into the creation versus evolution controversy. It's perfect for your arsenal of anti-evolution weapons, I guess you could say. And to pass around at church, to friends, to family. So a lot of people were encouraged. A lot of people appreciated the fact that they were able to buy in bulk. And specifically myself, I wanted to buy in bulk. So we, again, had it 1 or 2 days. We had it selling at cost. And it was a blessing to see how many people were buying them in bulk. And that's perfect. Have them handy, pass them around to friends, family, church members, so on and so forth. I know it's difficult to buy in bulk at full price. So what we're doing is we're having a 2-day special where, again, you can buy the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook in both color and black and white. Actually, correction, Matt, as you know, color for some reason costs a crazy amount to print. So cost doesn't even benefit anybody with the color. So it's going to be the black and white version at cost, which I think is $5 or $6, depending on where you are, UK, Canada, the States. We are going to do this for 48 hours. So myself, I'm going to be buying a whole bunch again as well. And so I'm going to make sure that the links are in the description box. Again, 48 hours. If you want to pick it up for the first time for, the cheapest it can be, as well as just buy a ton that you can pass around. Now's the time. So Matt, anyways, I want to thank you, brother, for also being here. What's going on, my good man? And excited to have you for a little bit of fun.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I got some background noise for us. Everything's going good. It's the middle of the night here, so everything's going pretty good. Just getting over being a little sick, but a little downtime is good sometimes. The only breaks we ever take are when we're sick, so it's kind of nice.
True. I think it's a sign when we get sick, then it's a sign that, you know what, you guys need to take a little bit of break and actually get some sleep for once. Yeah. So it's funny because of our different time zones. The 3 kids of mine and the wife are fast asleep, dreaming away, and yours are up, partying it up. So no worries.
No bedtime.
Glad to see the little man's having fun. So anyways, I guess we're just going to kind of get right into it again, since, this is the main reason why we're putting out this video. Is available now, Amazon, 2 days. You can get it at cost. You can't go wrong. I mean, it's 170 plus pages. It's the most comprehensive response to endogenous retroviruses and common descent in general that you're going to find. So click the link. If you're those that were encouraged from last time that you had the opportunity to buy them in bulk, to pass them around, feel free to do so. That is exactly why we're doing it, because the most important thing to us, right, Matt, is defending the truth of biblical creation. So we don't mind putting it up there at cost in order that as many people as possible can get a hold of this book. Okay. So anyways, let's go. Let's get right into some fun. So Matt, what I'm going to do is share screen and start with, we'll start with this slide here. Now, this is just a teaser. So again, we are going to be responding in great detail. I put out a Patreon post recently, just a few nights ago, just kind of giving everybody a teaser, a sneak peek into just how miserably of a fail this response was. And that's why it's a good sign for the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook, because the challenges presented in it have not been met. And I have a feeling they won't be met as we move forward. So, Matt, this was one specific comment that I found rather fascinating. Clearly, a lot of the critics, they still don't understand the fact that if the majority of our genome is not the result of deep time evolution, okay, if the majority of the genome does not reflect common descent, which means that, again, the majority of the genome should consist of what? Evolutionary leftovers, genomic fossils, and junk DNA. Okay. If that's not the case, and what we actually see is a genome of function, okay, in a nutshell, and the book goes into this in great detail. So for sake of time, I'm just going to say in a nutshell, what that means is what we're looking at is patterns, nested hierarchical patterns by design and not descent. Okay, that's the differentiating line of evidence. One differentiating line of evidence, that is, when it comes to descent, is function. Is the majority of the genome functional, or is the majority of the genome junk? If junk DNA is overturned, then with that overturns endogenous retroviruses as evidence for common descent. It also gets into a whole nother field, a whole nother topic with mutation accumulation. Okay. Even if the genome is only 10% functional, that's too much given what we know about low impact, nearly neutral, and deleterious mutation accumulation. If the genome is 50% or more functional, then evolution can't happen. That's it. Evolution's done. Okay. But anyways, Matt, what I want to do, brother, is just go over this comment. I found this one funny. Again, this is just a teaser. There's just a couple comments here and there that we're just too excited. We just kind of want to respond to and give some thoughts, right? Before we do a very technical video series response, as well as I've pointed out, a mini handbook for people to check out, the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook, refuting the critics. And the majority of these arguments have been anticipated. And so I didn't really want to make the book any longer than 170 pages. And there were dozens and dozens and dozens of references where a lot of the arguments put forth or objections are actually refuted directly in the references. So it kind of shows that these critics don't always, unfortunately, look up the references, right? So anyways, Matt, I'm going to read this comment, brother, and then let's give your thoughts on it. So DNA methylation. So Creation Myths on Twitter, which is Dan Stern Cardinale, he put forth this comment, this argument, to the fact that the majority of the genome has evidence for activity. Okay, biochemical activity, which suggests function, which is why biblical creationists have made testable predictions, testable and falsifiable predictions on DNA function, including function in endogenous retroviruses, allele sequences, pseudogenes, all kinds of genetic sequences. And so the argument goes from the critics, what we're looking at, the majority of this activity is spurious, or it's nothing more than genetic noise, right? And of course, in the book, I absolutely demolish that in great detail. This video is meant to be shorter, so we're not going to go into all the details. That's what the book's for. We're just kind of showing that this specific critic, and I do appreciate his feedback, and you know, the ripple effect of that is ongoing discussion pertaining to this important topic. But the responses to that argument were essentially ignored and dodged. Anyways, so Christian Myth says here, and then this spectacular lack of insight. Okay, and he quotes a portion of my book. where he says there should be evolutionary processes that would end up suppressing this transcription in an effort to preserve energy and resources. So he says, you think? Okay, and for more context, it's because as biblical creationists, Matt, as you know, we would suggest, okay, the majority of this activity, the reason why there is so much activity is because it's beneficial to the organism. It's doing something. It's there for a reason, right? And so we can make testable predictions because we like to point out the trajectory of discovery favors genome-wide functionality. And if the majority of this really is genetic noise or spurious, right, then for one, evolutionary processes over deep time should have weeded out a lot of this genetic baggage. I mean, it's very wasteful of energy and resources to keep this around and to transcribe a large portion of it. It's a waste if it's not really doing anything. And there should be mechanisms in the genome that would actually suppress all of this genetic baggage. And I point out in the book that evolutionists, it's all about storytelling, and what they like to do is force fit the data, okay, into their story. They don't want to question the story. They don't want to question the bigger picture. And so they would have us believe, right, Matt, that billions of years ago, we have non-living chemicals that somehow come together as the first self-replicating cell. And then we get multi-celled organisms, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and eventually man, okay, over billions of years. Basically, what we're looking at is single-celled-like ancestors to whales, to humans, to your great diversity of plants over time. But apparently, evolutionary processes can't remove all of this excess genetic baggage, garbage, and junk. You know, that's pretty amazing. It's pretty flabbergasting that evolutionary mechanisms can take a single-celled-like ancestor into a whale, a fish to a fisherman, goo to you, but not remove all of this genetic baggage after millions and millions of years. I mean, that's pretty hilarious. So he ends up saying, you think? Allow me to introduce you to my friend. DNA methylation is essentially his response here. Matt, what are your first thoughts on that, brother? Oh, did your mic die? I think you're on mute. Or
I flipped the switch on the mic, but it seemed to mute me permanently. I couldn't turn it back off with the mic. Kind of a one
no
edge.
worries, brother.
All
You're
right.
back. You're back, and you're ready to destroy some evolutionary rescue devices.
All right. Well, the first thing that came to my mind was evolution says if you don't use it, you lose it. That's a term that we hear today all the time, right? Well, that would make sense. The body's not going to be wasting energy and supplying it to something that's going to be worthless and deemed not necessary. Remember, evolution only wants to get you to the point where you can reproduce and then get out of the way. Well, what are endogenous retroviruses doing helping fight cancers? Most cancers aren't something that kids have to worry about. Cancers come much later in life. So what's the point of preserving something that's a backup mechanism to preserve you from dying from cancer late in life? That makes absolutely no sense. But before I digress, let's specifically talk about Dan's argument and how it actually hurts himself. And I'll tell you why. He is exposing that junk DNA is not really actually being junk, but actually involved by methylation factors, meaning this is an epigenetic signature. This is what's going on to flip genes activations on and off. And I like to think of ERVs like genes that work in different stages. They aren't fully operational 24/7. They're not a workforce that's always working perpetually. Rather, they're like a crew of firefighters that are ready for the alarm to go off and get to work at any time. So I want you to think about it. We have some that work for placental development, We have one that specifically works in stage 2 placental development. We have others that work to fight viruses and infections. We have others that fight cancer, like I mentioned earlier. Well, all of these things are individualized specific functions that work in stages. And if that's true, then think about it. Do you have a virus attacking you right now? Probably not. But somebody listening right now actually does. And that means that their specific ERV sequences are designed to protect them and function when that activity actually happens and occurs. But in the rest of us right now, that function is not occurring. So yes, the body is very selective on how we use that energy, and it's always trying to function at its most optimal. So why would an ERV that's only has a specific function that works, like, during these vital stages of life or during sickness, be considered junk? I would say it's because it's subjective. They've placed it there. It's a subjective classification, and evolutionists have overlooked ERVs all because they can't allow for their fully functioning genome and deep time to work in conjunction. They're incompatible with one another. So I say, think about it like this. A hospital is open and operational, but not functioning to its full capacity because there's no need for it to be. During a pandemic is when you actually see it functioning in high gear. So this analogy is akin to how evolutionists look at the genome and specifically junk DNA. If they do not see fully operational, therefore it must be not important or just trivial. But it's quite the contrary. So when we see something like what you're saying is, why are these things being supplied energy, and what's going on? Why is evolution keeping these around? Well, we would say it's obvious why they're being kept around, because they're serving a function. They're just like these firefighters waiting for the alarm to get called. Unfortunately, they can't see that perspective, right? They want to see something fully functioning, or they just deem it as junk, and that must be the leftovers, right? That's their classification scheme. Because if it is functional, that's a huge problem for them, and they would rather not look at it like that. So they have to ignore it. They're not willing to accept both. So epigenetics is a great thing for us because it shows the functional capacity of what they deem as junk. It's why they deemed that endogenous retroviruses would have no function. What did we find? The exact opposite. Their predictions completely failed. Their predictions that they weren't even firefighters present in the firehouse, that firehouse was abandoned millennia, eons ago. And that it's just surprising that there's even a foundation of a firehouse remnant there. Then when we look in there, we not only see the firehouse, we see the workers still in there. They're just asleep. They're waiting for something to happen. They're waiting for something in the genome or something in the body to happen so that they can get to work. That's what the function of ERVs are. That's how important they are. They are not junk. Just because they call them junk, they are not.
Well, those are some fantastic points, brother. And all throughout the book, I make these important points. And one of them, which I find funny here with what Dan is saying, is that the epigenome, right, when it comes to epigenetics and how we have this this additional layer of extremely complicated functional information that controls how the genes make the physical parts of our cells, right? And this specific information helps turn genes on and off. And I like to point out that, for one, these are non-random changes. Two, you need some kind of control mechanism. And it would not be good. It would be extremely detrimental if every single gene were turned on at the exact same time. That's why it's detrimental that you have some kind of control mechanism. And I point out in the book several times that what we're looking at here is evidence of forward thinking, which points us back to the forward thinker. And Dan plays dumb, essentially. He says, why is this evidence for forward thinking? Pretending to be ignorant on the topic. But the problem is natural selection sees the short term. Okay. Natural selection isn't worried about getting, cancer, you getting cancer 50 years from now. Selection's worried about tomorrow. But how do evolutionary mechanisms, which see the short term, build that which requires long-term thinking, long-term planning? like the epigenome, for example. And the fact that we have a lot of these endogenous retroviruses, and again, I touch on this in great detail in the book. So for sake of time, I'm obviously not going to go into incredible detail here, although I probably will in the video review and written review, is that a lot of these endogenous retroviral-like sequences, created units of DNA function, is what they're better referred to as. A lot of them are only functional during certain stages of an organism's existence. And some of those stages are in the various developmental windows, where they are called upon, they're utilized, and then they are essentially turned off. Their job is done. And so if you were to, like Dan, unfortunately, look to a specific class of these retrotransposons or created units of DNA function and see that it's, in this certain circumstance, not performing an active role, okay, then you would be wrong to conclude that it has no function. Since, for one, it was functional in various developmental windows, or certain environments can turn these functional DNA elements on. And you pointed out that given one of their main roles, Matt, has to do with protecting the organism, okay, specifically us, protecting us from viral invasion, from exogenous retroviral invasion, and protecting us from the endogenization of exogenous retroviruses. And so we're not constantly being bombarded with viruses. We're not constantly being bombarded with viral infections. And so a lot of these ERV-like elements are like bodyguards, right? They're sitting back, waiting to be called upon, waiting to perform one of their many functional roles. So yeah, a lot of the roles are not being manifested until it's necessary. Matt, what do you think about this analogy? Because the way that I see it, since the evolutionists are so unsophisticated in their thinking, right? And just really behind the times when it comes to this data. Okay, the genome is incredibly complex. It contains multiple overlapping codes. It's nested. It's 4-dimensional. And we write books forwards. We write books that can be read forwards. We point this out. But we don't write books that can be read both forwards and backwards. DNA can literally do this. It's information compression into every single genetic sequence, essentially. And what I was saying with that is the evolutionists, they have such an unsophisticated view of genome functionality that if they were to look at, let's say, the back seat of your car, we were discussing this, right? Your back seat, essentially, a lot of people's back seats, they don't get any use, right? Let's say you and your wife and the front seats, but the back seat's not being any use until you get maybe a guest or somebody that needs the back seat. Well, now it's useful. Or your spare tire. The evolutionists would look to that as redundant, unnecessary, junk DNA, not doing anything. Well, guess what? Good thing we have forward planning, forward thinking by the engineer of the various modes of transportation that actually front loaded the vehicle with a spare tire and a jack in case you get in case you get a flat tire. You're driving down the road, it's rough and it's winter and you get a flat tire. Thank God you got that spare tire. Now you can call upon it and use it. Or if you have some guests and they want to sit in the back seat of your car, they can use it. And that's what we see in the genome is we have a lot of redundant elements. We have a lot of functional DNA units that are waiting to be turned on or waiting for the point that is necessary for their function. I mean, these ERVs, they're necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. And this book goes over dozens and dozens of papers that are just essentially ignored for the most part. And the one thing that I want to say here, Matt, and then I'd love to get your thoughts, brother, is that in the book, I also point out that transcribing a portion of the genome that's active, okay, is extremely it's a process that is extremely energy intensive. And every time that a nucleotide is being added to a growing RNA chain, you're actually consuming an incredible amount of energy. And these transcripts would just clutter up the system. They would just clutter up the interior of the cell if they were not actually playing any operational role, any functional role. And that's why it's so important, this point, that if all of this is mostly the result or the representation of evolutionary leftovers in deep time evolutionary history, descent with modification, then yes, there should certainly be mechanisms that suppress this, or mechanisms that over time gets rid of it, weeds all this junk out. And Dan's explanation here of DNA methylation, Matt, again, does it work? Does it work? His explanation here.
It's just he doesn't know what he's agreeing to. Is essentially he tried to answer one specific sentence rather than the entire thing, and is trying to say like, oh well, methylation, histones, epigenetics, those allow things to be in a state where they don't use energy and do those things. Well, okay, you're still not answering the question, the bigger picture. What are we saying that they are doing? So if you and I go back to the car analogy, what would be akin to endogenous retroviruses? The first thing that comes to my mind would be safety mechanisms, right? Like the all of the things when you back up, the backup camera, it's not always on, right? No, it's only on when you're backing up, but it's using a lot of energy, so your car doesn't run at full time. It's kind of stupid, right? Well, what are the big things in the car that do that? Well, that would be like an airbag going off, right? That's really to save you. So when does that occur? Well, not very often. That's only when you're in a wreck. So there's things that take part and they're playing just like the body. The body's not always in constant danger. It's not always in a constant state of death. So there's a lot of not times when endogenous retroviruses are doing anything. So when you look in the genome, or you look in your car and you go, let's see what's going on, and you turn the key and you're testing it, and you're like, well, the reverse camera is not on. That must be junk, worthless. It's not using up any energy. So therefore, we're just going to classify that as junk. No, Dan, no. You're looking at it from your shallow perspective. We keep telling you to open your mind. You're starting with the conclusion that common ancestry is true, and then not giving opportunity for any other alternative to be allowed to be in view. So therefore, that's why you're stuck in the mindset, because you can't allow endogenous retroviruses to be anything other than evidence for common ancestry. That leaves you guys with that narrow, shallow, closed mindset and not free thinkers. That's why we constantly say evolution is anti-science. It's why it hinders actual science, because what we observe, if it's not true to you guys and your story, it can't be real. So even though we observe it, no, it can't be right. It can't be true, because evolution must be true. That's what I mean. You're starting with it. You're starting with the wrong thing. So that's why when the evidence comes out like this, you have to say, well, how can we wield this into evolution? It's not what you're supposed to do. There's other alternatives.
And that's exactly why, you noticed, even the most militant of critics, Matt, they don't do what? They don't make testable predictions. They just criticize. And usually their criticisms are based on a straw man argument. And I've pointed out, you've pointed out over and over again. Okay, I remember pointing this out to Gutsy Gibbon almost 2 years ago, maybe at this point. And I think my second debate with her, where we spent a great amount of time discussing junk DNA. I've heard all these guys' rescue devices now for years. And I'm hearing them again in this response to this book, lack of response. And I've pointed out, just because a DNA sequence or a DNA element, okay, is not performing its functional role at a certain time, even if you knock it out, okay, and there's no effect essentially on phenotype, that does not mean it's not functional, because it's actually a fact. We know this, that many non-coding regions of the genome, including many non-coding RNA genes like pseudogenes, which we also know are necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell, which I demonstrate throughout this book, and that was ignored as well. We know that they only function under certain conditions, certain environmental conditions. And again, as I pointed out, these ERV sequences, a lot of them are incredibly important in embryological development. And so if if there's a certain class of retrotransposon that's functional in embryological development, and then these developmental stages are over and it's no longer functional, right? It's done its job. Okay. That doesn't mean that it's no longer functional if you were to like snip it out or you were to test it somehow. The evolutionists would conclude, no, this is not functional, when in fact it's just not turned on. It's done its job. Or maybe it's been distributed to another function, as in if a certain environment or stressor pops up, then it can take on another job. Okay, so a lot of the DNA, a lot of these DNA elements are only functional under a restricted time, and a lot of this is in embryological development, which is why extensive testing is so important, including mutagenesis, obviously genetic knockout tests. That is unethical when it comes to humans, but there is extensive genetic testing that is required to determine with any level of certainty that a genetic sequence or DNA element is non-functional. And it's why, from the design diversity starting point, which I talk a lot about in the book, is so powerful that we can make testable predictions, and we're confident about it. Isn't that right, Matt? I want to share screen, because one thing I know you found funny as well is, and I put out a Patreon post again that talks about how Dan's essential argument for all of these amazing functions in determining cell types, functional in the immune system, in embryological development, gene regulation, gene expression, in so many things. Antiviral protection, the immune system, as I put out, cell stress responses. It's function after function after function. You cannot read chapter 4 and come away thinking that what we're looking at is DNA elements where the majority are junk. No, that's been overturned. That's weak. So his response, Matt, as you know, was technically, well, these viruses, before they are passed on vertically, before they're integrated and become endogenous, okay, they've already got the pre-existing ability for these functions, for these operational roles. And he pretty much just says these are expected, right? And of course, we're going to address this in great detail. These are expected. Remember that. Hold that thought, okay, brother? Tell me what you think about, for one, the thumbnail of this, but also, so according to Dan, these are expected. But yeah, notice this. We have paper after paper. There's just a couple here. Recent studies also point towards an until now unexpected, but no, Dan says it's expected. And I've already challenged, not just Dan, any critic. Show us where these essential functional roles that sustain healthy life processes in the cell, that literally these papers admit that if we did not have these ERV sequences, humans wouldn't exist. We wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be here. Okay. They're required. It's evidence for design. And I challenge them. I challenge Dan. It's not been met. Show us where. Because you can tell stories all day. You can make claims all day. You can say that the moon is made out of green cheese. That's a claim. Anybody can say anything, but without any empirical evidence, without any backing, without any support, it's pseudoscience. It's science fiction. And all I'm seeing is the manifestation and the preaching of Dan's science fiction religion. That's all he wants to do, is preach his science fiction religion. We want empirical evidence. We want testable predictions. That's the gold standard of science. And here's the thing. I want to see a technical paper. I want to see any evidence where Dan or any of these evolutionary scientists on paper predicted these functional roles or said that they were expected. Because no, we have papers as early as in not that long ago, like 2022, 2021, where they're admitting that these are unexpected. Unexpected role of the immune system for the control of these elements, even those that do not contain fully infectious copies. They can have rescue devices all day, okay, but they're not going to work. Notice this. Unbiased analyses of these genomic maps have uncovered endogenous retroviruses as an expected. No, Dan, it doesn't say that, Danny boy. As an unexpected ally in the regulation of human immune systems. We know why ERV sequences resemble viral genetic materials, because one of their jobs is they act as the organism's antiviral protectors. Just like a computer, hopefully you have antiviral programs, right, Matt? A lot of people have Norton antivirus. Our genetic systems have been front loaded with many classes of functional DNA elements, and many of these ERV sequences perform viral mimicry, tumor suppression, and fight off these exogenous retroviruses, the invasion of these viruses, and they do it and can only do it. Okay, this function is predicated on the fact that they resemble exogenous retroviruses. And these were not expected, like Dan asserts. It's a claim, it's unsupported. Show us where these functions were predicted before they were found. Matt, any thoughts, brother?
He won't be able to find it. Matter of fact, if you go back to the early days of endogenous retroviruses, you don't find anybody making predictions because they immediately assumed evolution is true. Therefore, they have no function at all. They're genomic mummies. They're zombies. That's all that's left. That's just a shell. There's nothing. Matter of fact, I hunted it down and I found the first person to ever make a prediction that they might have a function. Not what type they would have, but that they actually do. Her name was Barbara McClintock. She was born in 1902, and she made a prediction in 1975 that ERVs might have some type of a function, and they just laughed at her. It was just ruled out as an idea. Didn't even get into it for decades later. Decades later did they even consider what she was talking about. So she was the first one. She won a Nobel Prize in 1983 for in medicine for something. But I was just looking up what her concepts were on endogenous retroviruses because I wanted to figure out when was the first person to actually say anything about this possible function. And no, they were not predicting function. They predicted dead, worthless remnants of a shell zombie virus that was just dead over eons of time, and they just got passed down because they're in the germline, and that's it. That's the only reason they're there. And how they gained a function, they have no idea why or how. They just say, I don't know. There's lots of them. Okay, well, ooh, that's real good. That's helpful.
Yeah, it's bad. I mean, to just say that these viruses already have the capabilities for gene expression, embryological development, determining cell types, antiviral protection, cell stress responses, immune system. I mean, it's just gene regulation, gene expression. It's just to hand wave, functional in the epigenome, epigenetics. It's just a hand wave at all. He has no answer. Nobody has an answer. Show us then an example of an integration that becomes a necessary part to the health of an organism. Show us. I want to see it, because all they're trying to do is twist the data to fit their story. They ask, why do these ERV elements resemble viral genetic material? I provide a comprehensive response in the book, and the response given is storytelling, an assertion, a claim. Do you see how they're not actually looking for an answer? Why do these sequences resemble viral genetic material? Well, because many of their functional roles are predicated, can only be carried out because of their similarities to these exogenous retroviruses. But apparently to the critics that are willingly ignorant, because 2 Peter 3 says in the last days there's going to be scoffers, right? They're not looking for an answer. So they give claims. They provide assertions, no testable predictions, nothing empirical, nothing to back up these arguments. As a matter of fact, the technical data, the technical literature, the primary source data that I cite so frequently in this book refutes these arguments. Dan says expected, the papers say unexpected. Who do we believe? Who do we believe? Do we believe Dan, who obviously is invested in his militant anti-young earth creation apologetics? Or do we believe these technical papers? Matt, go ahead.
I just looked it up real quick. I wanted to say, what do scientists call endogenous retroviruses according to junk DNA? They have two words: viral hitchhikers and fossil viruses.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
That was all they ever predicted. They were nothing but ancient remnants of a time long past, where they won't do anything and they're there just because of the germline, and that it helps prove common ancestry because you can track those back in time. And what did we say all along? We would expect to see genetic similarities because of function. Guess what we found? Exactly what young Earth creationists predicted the entire time. And they're still not making the predictions. It's funny. We are, they're not. Ours get right, theirs get not. And they get mad at us. Isn't that ironic? It's like losing a race and still mad at the guy that beat you, even though he trained for the race and you didn't even know you were in a race.
Well, it's funny because, you know, this book specifically really does dismantle the best evidence for evolution. And I completely overturned junk DNA because without junk DNA, okay, evolution's dead. Common descent is dead. But Matt, the nested hierarchical patterns, I mean, chimpanzees share more of these created units of DNA function with humans, right? We share more with the chimpanzee than we do with, you know, an old world monkey, or than we do with, you know, a fish or a dog. It's like, of course, if these are created units of DNA function that have been front loaded for countless reasons that this book gets into that are ignored and dodged and unchallenged, then of course, since we share more with the chimpanzee in terms of morphology, anatomy, physiology, and genetics, then yes, we are going to share more with them than we would with a lemur, some old world monkey, a fish, a dog, whatever. And when it comes to the shared mutations, as tempting as it is to get into now, that's going to be something to demolish. And it's funny because the testable predictions that I make in the book, the fact that it's the evolutionary community that assumes all DNA differences, all DNA variations, all SNPs are the result of mutations over time. That is why it is so important that I, as we always do, properly explain the design diversity model. The fact that creationists explain the vast majority of genetic variation, DNA differences in DNA elements, not as the result of mutations or viral infections, but as created heterozygosity and design diversity. Two different starting points. Okay. Dan is arguing from his starting point. He's just disregarding the design diversity starting point, assuming every single quote unquote mutation really is a mutation, when in fact what we're looking at could be the functional requirements of the specific organism, the way that an orangutan uses its ERV sequences differently in terms of cell optimization, information flow, so on and so forth, than say a human. And then, of course, in the book, we get into mutational hotspots, mutational cold spots. And Dan doesn't like that. Dan doesn't like that. He doesn't engage with my testable predictions. He just attacks the mutational hotspot argument. And you're going to see an extensive response to his response, I guess, to the mutational hotspots in the upcoming written review and also video series. So that brings me to this, because already, Matt, you and I can talk, brother. So what I'm going to do is the last thing we wanted to share here. So I'm going to share audio, and I am going to mute myself so we don't get any background feed. And I just want to show everybody exactly why my hopes were not exactly high for Dan's review, because he put out a video maybe a week or two prior to his review where he had a criticism of something in the book. And I watched his criticism and I took note of it. And he misrepresented essentially what I was saying and doing in the book. And that was my first experience, my first example of what to expect in his review. And so my hopes were not high. So we're going to play this clip and then we're going to respond to it. And then we're going to wind it down, guys, because again, this video was to notify everybody that 2 days, a special, pick it up, click the link. It's at cost and it'll be worth it. Trust me. Okay, here we go.
But anyway, so on page 12 of this book, we get an interesting claim. This book is all about endogenous retroviruses and how they don't actually support evolution. It doesn't matter for what we're talking about today. This is a small excerpt from page 12. We have a line right here where the author, SFT, basically makes this argument. Say they have acknowledged, they being evolutionists, have acknowledged that for most of these ERV sequences, the infections would have occurred millions of years ago in the ancient and unobservable past. The argument that's being implied here is that ERV integration into the genome is assumed because it's not observed. It happened in the past. We can't observe it happening in the present. Right? That's the argument that's being made here. And to do this, he has this quote right here. He says, endogenous, and this is from a paper, endogenous retroviruses are proviral sequences that result from the colonization of the host germline by exogenous retroviruses. The majority of ERVs represent defective retroviral copies. However, for most ERVs, endogenization occurred millions of years ago, obscuring the stages by which ERVs become defective and the changes in both virus and host important to the process. Now, you can see just a little bit of pencil mark right there because I'm annotating this book as I go. And in the margin next to that, I wrote, bet that's the abstract. I went and looked up the paper, and it turns out that is, in fact, the abstract. And it's better than that. This is the beginning of the abstract. This line right here, that's the setup line that I just described previously. This is the state the problem line in the abstract. What we're going to do right now is put this line with the full abstract side by side. Is this an accurate representation of the author's actual position? Nope. It turns out that the paper is actually about the exact opposite of the point that SFT is making here. Remember, he's arguing that ERV integration happened way in the past and it's not observable, so how can we know anyway if they actually come from viruses? Well, let's look at this abstract. This is the full abstract from the paper, which is linked below if you want to see the full paper. Really interesting paper. So we have the line right here that he quoted. However, for most ERVs, blah, 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 right? That's the line. Well, let's read the next line in the abstract right here. The koala retrovirus KORV only recently began invading the germline of the koala, permitting analysis of retroviral endogenization on a prospective basis. In other words, we have an example of this process happening in real time that we can observe in progress. That's what the literal next.
Okay, so he's claiming, I'm going to share screen for this because I've got the pages saved right here to go. Matt, we can certainly get your thoughts on this as well. So here's the page. So apparently chapter 1, okay, which I make clear, is titled, let's see here, The Important Details. I don't know if people can see it. The Important Details. So this chapter is not necessarily to make an argument or response. All it is built for, which I mentioned in either the introduction or the preface of it, is to provide the reader with the technical details, the important details, before we actually get into the meat of the book, where we address the details and the argument. Okay, so if you look here, page 12, right, I just go into what these are assumed to be, the evolutionary story, what is a retrovirus, what's an ERV made of, right? The LTRs, the long terminal repeats, the gag, the pole, the ENV, properties of it. How do exogenous retroviruses become endogenous retroviruses? All these things, all these important things to know before you actually get into again the meat of it. Okay, we don't want the reader to be confused. We want them to have a good basic knowledge or understanding of the topic as we get into the details in terms of the creation explanation for them. So here you'll notice this is apparently what here we go. They have also acknowledged, notice this, they have also acknowledged that for most of these ERV sequences, the infections would have occurred millions of years ago. This is what I say. But notice what I say, most. Because this is what happens when Dan probably just read the first chapter and then said, yeah, here's something that I can use against SFT. You know what I mean? Even though all throughout the book, I talk about how one of the main functional roles, right, Matt, of these ERV sequences is to fight off invading viral infections and to hopefully stop the endogenization of an invading viral infection, exogenous retrovirus. Okay. And closer to the end of the book, I go into predictions regarding fixed and unfixed ERV sequences, right? Because we do know that we have DNA repair enzymes. Every single cell division, we have new mutations accumulating in the somatic cell lines. If it weren't for the DNA repair enzymes that are built into the systems that make life, we'd mutate into oblivion in a couple generations. Okay. So the mutation rate is high, 100 new mutations per person per generation, even in light, right, Matt? Even in light of all the amazingly intricate and well-designed DNA repair enzymes in organisms, in the genomes of organisms. But here's the thing, they don't do their jobs perfectly. Okay. So mutations still occur, right? Changes in the nucleotide sequence, typographical errors. And I point out in the book that one of the functions of the pre-existing ERV sequences that I would say are created units of DNA function is to stop the possible endogenization of harmful viral infections. I predict those, though, the unfixed, the rare ones, would be harmful, not beneficial to the genome, to the organism, essentially. But the pre-existing ones that actually help fight this off, the antiviral programs, the protectors, the superheroes of the genome, those are beneficial to the organism. And I specifically back this up with this same paper, okay? Degradation and remobilization of endogenous retroviruses by recombination during the earliest stages of germline invasion. How am I misrepresenting the paper if one of my main arguments, obviously elaborated later on in the book, this is just the important details, okay? We're not going to get into all of it here. This is just to show that even the evolutionary community would admit that most, okay, creationists and evolutionists would admit, right, Matt, that most of these, notice I said most, I feel like I need to highlight that, most of these ERV sequences, the infection would have occurred millions of years ago. Even Dan would agree with that, because they have to explain why so many are fixed, right? They exist in every single person, for example. They're stuck in place, fixation. And then what does the quote say? Endogenous retroviruses, ERVs, are proviral sequences that result from colonization of the host germline by exogenous retroviruses, right? The majority, notice the majority, and I say most, okay, same thing, of ERVs represent defective retroviral copies. However, again, for most ERVs, exactly what I say for most, endogenization occurred millions of years ago. What do I say? Most have occurred millions of years ago. Now, would anybody say that millions of years ago is observable? Like, do we, you know what I mean? So yeah, the ones millions of years ago would be unobservable. We're looking at the fossil viruses. We're looking at the vestiges, the relics today. Okay. However, for most ERVs, endogenization occurred millions of years ago, obscuring the stages by which ERVs become defective, and so on and so forth. I get into that later as well from this paper. That is not a quote mine. I am just showing from the primary source data that yes, I am representing them correctly. Most would have occurred millions of years ago. This is what they say. Most. I say most. Elsewhere in the book, I say yes, it's possible that viruses can be integrated and passed on vertically in the same way that a mutation can happen, right? These DNA repair enzymes and ERV sequences are not necessarily doing their job perfectly. And what's funny here, page, let's see here, 48. So 48, barely into the book. I believe this is the design diversity hypothesis. Notice what I say. As we discussed in chapter 1, apparently where I quote mine, right, Matt? Be curious as to your thoughts on this, brother. Retroviruses have RNA as their genetic material, so a few of the things I got into, and they are reverse transcribed into DNA, and DNA can then become integrated into the genome. Remember, these are mobile elements. And again, the retrotransposition function of these mobile elements is also predicated on their, is dependent, and they generate variation, turn genes on and off. And these roles within the genome, these pre-existing ERVs, are predicated on, again, their similarities to viral genetic material. So they need to stop. You know, Barry Desperate, he likes to give this quiz, right? Where he likes to say, well, what's this for? Why is this? Well, you know, what about the reverse transcriptase or integrase, or, you know, what's this for? The gag, the pole. It's like, it's all there. It's all required. It's all necessary. The structure, the properties, everything about the ERV sequence is necessary to carry out its roles. It would be like Barry Despereau. Hopefully he sees this, okay? Because his arguments are so desperate. It'd be like him sending us a 2-page document, Matt, that says, you know, of a human being, the functional unit that is a human being, right? What does the heart do? What does the lungs do? What does the liver do? What does the appendix do? Your legs, your hands, your arms. Oh, but your hands aren't essential. I mean, those aren't required, you know, or your feet or whatever. It's like, that's what they want to say about the ERV. It's only this one part of the ERV that's functional in the embryo. or in the in placental formation and things like it's just so weak. No, it's the unit. The ERV unit is functional, and then there's functional elements or properties within the unit, and some of them do different things. My hands do different things than my heart. My feet does something different than my eyes. Okay. And people can live without their feet, their hands. People can live without a whole lot of stuff. It doesn't mean that they're not necessary. I mean, the very weak responses. So notice what I'll say here. They can move around. They can make copies of themselves and insert throughout the genome. Pretty soon we're getting to this. Apparently what I quote mine just ignored. There's no quote mining in this whole book. I decimate ERVs as evidence for common descent with the technical literature. There's nothing that is quote mined. Dan's desperate Dan. Damage control Dan. So here we go. This mobility ends up disrupting the incorporation of retroviral DNA into the genome. Notice this. This is a very important function in protecting us from the invasion of retroviruses. It's amazing. These pre-existing ERV sequences, okay, can combat the infecting viruses. This makes sense in light of the nature of one of their many functional roles and mechanisms. And I quote Dr. Fazal Rana here, PhD biochemist. And I do so a few times in this book because Dr. Rana and I had a 2-part series here where we destroyed junk DNA. I've had him on here twice. We did a series that's been ignored, right? So he's been a blessing in this. The research team from Germany, the U.S., and it goes into the koala, all right, the KORV. And in other words, it appears as if pre-existing ERVs in the koala genome, through the process of retrotransposition, inserted copies of themselves into endogenized KORV, disrupting their sequence, notice this, and consequently disabling them, stopping them in their tracks. The pre-existing ones, the fixed ones, the ones that are beneficial and necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. The researchers concluded that this process doesn't appear to require the DNA sequence of the pre-existing ERV to bear any similarity to the KORV. In other words, the research team discovered that pre-existing ERVs play a role in imparting koalas with an innate immunity against KORVs. So we have built-in antiviral programs that not only protect against viral invasions. If a viral invasion gets through the antiviral protectors, the built-in systems, and let's say they get integrated and become endogenized, well, guess what? The pre-existing ERVs can also disrupt the endogenization, right? Disrupt their sequence and disable them, stop them. I mean, these are roles that these are mind-boggling. It's science fiction what's occurring at the molecular level. And I touch on this, but apparently it's quote mine. I'm scared of it. No, we're not scared of it, Dan. You're scared of it. It's why you don't engage it. It's why you don't engage it. Notice this, Matt. If you're still here, I'm screen shared. Maybe you fell asleep, brother. I've been ranting. So notice this. It's only a handful that are functional. Matt, what does this say? In fact, this is one page of my book, 173 pages. This book decimates ERVs as evidence for common descent. Pick it up, guys. You're not going to regret. It's $5 right now for 2 days. This is a great sign, watching how badly a PhD virologist failed. In fact, the researchers believe that this mechanism may be widespread among animals, including humans. If so, the ERVs embedded within genomes serve as an antiviral defense system. Guys, this checks off all the boxes. And another thing, this is page 4849. Dan in his review, nothing but whining and complaining and dodging and dipping and diving and ducking and dodging all over the place. 5D's a dodgeball. Tries to say, well, it takes forever for Standing for Truth to get to the answers to the questions, the argument that he presents in the introduction. When in fact, I anticipated some of these militant critics would say that. We're not 48 to 49 pages into the book, and I'm already giving a brief dismantling of ERVs as common descent. Yes, chapter 4 is the absolute dismantling of it, but I give some teasers here and there throughout the book, okay? So, it's just not looking good for them. It's just not looking good for them. We can explain why they are there and why they look the way they do. Okay. And then, of course, I get into more after that. So the whole point is, no, this is not a quote mine. Any objective viewer, I'm not talking about these ones that are willingly ignorant. They're scoffers. They're full-time anti-young earth creationists. I'm not talking about those. We're not writing these to convince the dodgeball Dans of the world. They're not going to be convinced. We pray they will be, of course. We wish that all would come to repentance. But the reality is some people, they're just so invested in their evolutionism. They are so invested in believing that they and a strawberry are related through common ancestry. And they are so invested that they will just dodge all of the challenges, all of the functions, and instead they will say these are expected, even though we've shown that the technical literature says that they were unexpected. Matt, that was a lot there, brother. Tell me, was that a quote mine? After all of that, was that a quote mine?
It's clearly obvious that Dan did not get to page 48 or 49 when he started making his video section on that part. He started taking notes and was like, oh yeah, this is going to be good. And then probably got to even 48 or 49 and didn't notice it again. And just just skimmed over it and then made the video anyway, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, look, guys, we both realize that when we read any secular evolutionary paper, that it's going to agree with evolution. Okay, we're not brain dead, but that's not the point. The point is that you can look at the data and interpret it entirely different when you're a free thinker. If you're looking at, think about the stock market, one guy standing next to you will look at the same charts and they'll see a really positive, bullish sign in the charts. You'll look at it and you'll see a bearish market, something really negative. But how? You're looking at the exact same physical evidence. Well, it just goes to show you that there's interpretations that can be made on the data. And when you have somebody like Dodgeball Dan, who's invested financially and monetarily, and it's his business, and that's what he does for a living, he'll never concede. I know, because I did martial arts for years, and guess what? When you get somebody that's been training for 20 years in something, and you try to convince them to come over and join yours, they're not going to do it. They're already invested 20 years. They're not going to change. They know they're not going to have enough time in their life to learn what you have and what you do, so they neglect it, and that just hurts them. We're only telling it for their benefit and for everybody's benefit. So, hey, if you don't want to, that's on you. But don't tell us we're wrong when you're unwilling to even accept what we're talking about and as a potential alternative. When you've already said no, that it can't possibly be that way, you've just proven yourself having a blindfold on when you ever look at any of the information that comes from our camp. You've already concluded that it was wrong before you looked at it. And that is as anti-science as you can get. So when Dan says oh, I'd fail you. Well, yeah, I bet you would.
Dan will fail you if you don't believe that strawberries and whales are related through common ancestors. This is how people like Joshua Stramidas, Joel Duff, Dan Stern Cardinale, Herman Mays, this is how they read technical papers, for one, coming out of Young Earth Creations, how they read the books we put out. Okay, take the blindfold off, guys. Come on, let's go. Be objective. They're not objective. We are quote mining, apparently, if we don't agree with the conclusions of these authors. What do they say over and over again, Matt, when it comes to these ERV functions? Literally functions that are essential. Humans won't exist. Mammals wouldn't exist if it wasn't for these various classes of retrotransposons. And what do they say? Well, in these technical papers, they say engines of evolution, co-option, right? Dan says they're expected. The technical papers won't even go that far, but Dan will just say they were expected.
Yeah, of course they were. Yeah, we don't know how, but they were expected.
Right. This paper and this paper and this paper say that these antiviral roles and these roles in the immune system, unexpected. Dan, right, he wants a couple deletion mutations in there. He removes the U and the N, and these are expected. Because here's the thing, Dan knows that most of his audience are just looking for confirmation bias. Okay. They want so badly to believe that banana plants and whales and chimpanzees and humans are related through common ancestry, and ERV sequences, shared ERV sequences are amazing evidence for this. And, they want to sit there in the morning when they're eating their strawberries on their oatmeal, and they want to be like, yeah, that's that right there. I'm related to that strawberry through common ancestry. It's confirmation bias.
Man,
and Dan knows that most people aren't objective enough to look into this. They want an answer, no matter how bad the answer is. And Dan provides the worst possible answer, and they jump all over it. It's a story. It's a claim. It's an assertion. They're expected. No, they're not. He literally dodged 99% of the book. Okay. And this is just a teaser, guy. We're having too much fun. We're not even breaking a sweat. Like, we're just going to be taking our time. We're going to be taking little clips of Dan and, the so-called quote mines and the expected functions, and just wait till we get to the mutational hotspots. I mean, the poor guy's incapable of arguing without first assuming universal common ancestry. But anyways, we've now gone over an hour, because even a teaser, when you say more things wrong than letters that are in, let's say, a sentence, let's say Dan says a sentence, there's more things wrong in that sentence than letters that are in that sentence, it's going to require a lot. It's going to require a lot. And we are comprehensive, and we are thorough, and we are bringing the heat, Matt. And you know what, Matt? The critics, they can't handle the heat, brother.
Never can. Why do you think they hate us so much?
Yeah. Oh, well, okay, but I'm going to give you the final words here then. What are your thoughts? This was the teaser. Firstly, again, to anyone in the audience, click the link, go buy it. The price is updated, but sometimes it does take a couple hours for it to show up. So if you want, just wait for it to show up. It's going to be $5. Buy them. If you haven't bought it yet, you want it for an all-time low price, pick it up. It'll be worth it. Pass it around. Matt, what was your overall thoughts of Dan's review, and how bad is it going to be for him when we get out our full video and written review? And just go ahead, brother. Final thoughts, final words, final rants, whatever you want.
Yeah, a lot of people are fairly new to the endogenous retrovirus topic in general. It's a fairly new argument that started coming up, and they started using it more and more. And so we're hearing a little bit more of it just from that in general. And most of the people reach out to people like Dr. Dan because he's a specialist, and that is his specialty, virology. So the study of viruses, which endogenous retroviruses are. So people have, like Aaron Raw, have him on, but they'll never challenge him because they've never even heard the words before. They don't even know the definition of what any of those words actually even mean. So he's not going to encounter any resistance, and they're just going to nod their head and go shake it and go like, yeah, I totally agree. Absolutely. When it's just over their head in general, right there, because it's confirmation bias. They're just interested in whatever he's going to say. They'll just believe it because that's the exact mindset that they have. They need to believe something. He's the guy that's going to give them what they want to hear. Therefore, that's it. They're content with that. That's fine, but not in our world. We like to test ourselves, challenge ourselves. Donny and I believed in evolution. We weren't raised young earth creationists, or even probably Christian for that matter. I wasn't. So we looked at it objectively and go, you know what? This makes way more sense. I'm going to open my mind up to the possibility that I was lied to, and you can do the same. So when you go out and you were like, interesting, what is this endogenous retrovirus stuff? Maybe I'll be into it. Well, great. Look at it from both views. This book gives you one view, then go and read the other view. The other view is everywhere online. Very easy to find anything about endogenous retroviruses, but you might not know much about them. Therefore, this book gives you a perspective that you would not normally find about endogenous retroviruses, one that comes from the creationist perspective. So again, it allows you to think and open your mind up to there being another view, and you're looking at the same evidence. So they have the same evidence as we do. We just look at it and view it and make predictions on those things. They say they do, but they don't. And oftentimes when they make predictions, they're entirely wrong. That should be the red flag after red flag. So checking out this book will introduce you to it. It'll introduce you to the arguments and things that you can use to defend the concept after you learn it and go like, this is great, I like this evidence, and I'm going to choose to be on the young earth creation side of this. Well, you're going to want to know how to defend this view. Obviously, you don't want to just believe something without evidence. So therefore, now you have the ability to defend it. And we're going to go into that next step for you and criticize anything that's even going to come against us after that. Anybody that's going to criticize the book in any way is just going to get demolished. So stay tuned for that. And there will be that second updated book that will come out much later, and it will take any critique that was made against it and question that arose and answer all of those as well. So I hope that was good.
Well said. But Matt, you're misrepresenting the authors. They're not young earth creationists. They don't believe in separate ancestry. I mean, didn't you read? They said co-option. Engines of evolution. Matt, why are you misrepresenting these authors?
Yeah, why would those people want a paycheck? I don't know. Why would they want free grant money? Why would they have wanted to go all of those years in college to get a degree in something that's completely worthless now? What?
But Matt, it says these are widespread, these functions, these abilities, and it's also unexpected. But Matt, they're not widespread and they're not expected, or they are expected.
No,
it's hard for me to just lie, right?
Yeah, just making things.
But the critics, they just make stuff up. They just make stuff, and it's dangerous when it's a PhD like Dan, because they can just say whatever they want, make claims, assertions that even contradict the primary source data, which he failed to engage throughout this book. And those in his audience, they're just going to be like, they're going to be sitting there, and they're just going to swallow it up because, well, a PhD said it. So heck,
yeah,
these functions must have been expected. Go ahead.
Right. And then we go, oh, no, wait, we have a PhD that also says that these functions are over here on young earth creation. They go, well, yeah, but he's a creationist. Right. So the PhD doesn't count when it's before the name of somebody that's a creationist. See how biased it is again?
Oh, yeah.
These militant critics, they don't care. See, this is the problem. We're dealing with people that are, they have some mental problems. So, we're trying to deal with that the best we can. It's just a little hard, you know what I mean? We get a little bit of problem with that. I deal with people that get punched in the head for a living, so I do the best I can with them.
Yeah. Well, they're willingly ignorant. That's their problem, a lot of them. So, Matt, great final words, great points. We're going on an hour and 15 minutes. We're going to wrap it up here. And I believe we're going to be doing some behind the scenes stuff for the next couple of days because, man, we've been pumping out content, debates, interviews, lectures, videos, and more. So, but we're asking, though, and I will say the next big project, at least I know for the book that I'm working on, is the Human Evolution Handbook. So that's the next big project. And so stay tuned for that. And again, just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And guys, share around this content because the truth is so incredibly important. God bless everybody. We'll see you later.